Do a refresh after you do it.
Oh, and then go relive.
Hot on the mic.
You're hot on the mic.
You're hot on the mic. See, it's clear now.
No, Kirk, there actually is an ointment for that. You should be okay.
Well, you should ask my wife. It really does hurt.
Bump, bump. There we go.
This auto lock thing on my phone is not cool. I don't like it.
You can change it.
A little bit, like,
I know.
blurry, but
It's all right. It looks all right.
you know, also.
Huh. We're on the mic. All right. We haven't gotten a comment of, hey, do you idiots know you're on the screen?
Is there anyone even on? Oh, you have one viewer.
One
Right.
viewer.
Hey, viewer.
No, we got 15 people over on LinkedIn. All right.
Dang.
Julie, why don't you just run the opener?
Let's go.
Run the intro. Let's do
Run
this.
the intro.
Going early.
Refreshed. So.
Um,
Bum, bum.
Thanks for the intro, Chuck. What's going on, Digital Wildcatters? John Mink said, hey, you idiots, you know you're on. Thanks, John, for giving us the obligatory.
That would be Mr. Idiot to you. Just
Mister.
So, got a packed show. We got Mark Myers in the house. We got Kirk Coburn. We got Chuck Yates.
What's up?
We got the crew. Chuck, you look like you went down on the bling this today.
didn't
right?
change- he didn't
Still
change
got
his
the
I got
shirt.
the bling.
Still
It's
got
hiding.
the
bling.
It's hiding.
We also had to go up on the camera because supposedly last week it said, "I'm
The
a
guy-
ray of fucking."
Yeah,
and
it
we
didn't
cut
catch
off sunshine.
it didn't
But we
catch
got
the
sunshine. I got the bling on. All right, let's do this. Number one, the DOE this morning, first time since Hiroshima, they created a net energy gain through fusion, i.e., we slammed two atoms together. The energy it took to create that set off more energy. This is like the panacea, clean energy. This is the holy grail.
Yeah.
What say you, Collin?
Well, I want to hear Kirk's take on this because there's a lot of, let's call it, back and forth around fusion energy. Some say that this is just cap for the guys at this table. It means it's bullshit. Some people think that this is a big breakthrough. What do you guys think? I mean, do we think that this is real? Is it hype?
You got to realize that my first thought of fusion comes from the movie The Saint. Remember this movie? Val
Roger
Kilmer?
Moore.
No, Val Kilmer.
No.
Where we-
Roger Moore. It originally.
Oh my gosh.
keep going.
Dating.
We
I'm
keep
trying to be a
going.
little bit more relevant.
Oh, Mark, don't act like you don't know Roger Moore.
Where anything like fusion, if it existed, it's like everyone wants to kill you and it's too secret. So when I'm investing into these fusion ideas, people call me like, when I was at Shell and even privately, like, I've got this deal, but it's so hush hush. I'm like, what's the category? Like fusion energy, but just on the down low. Don't tell anybody.
I'm at a page.
And I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, I don't know. Is it legit? I think it's technically there's some barriers that need to be overcome. And I've seen pitches. I don't think they figured out the technology barriers yet.
Yeah.
But I love the category because it brings a lot of secrecy and soon to be a lot of suicides happening because it's so amazing that if they figured it out, your life's in danger.
I was raising capital for Digital Wildcatters in our seed round, and I was pitching this angel investment group, and there was 3 companies. So it was me and 2 other companies, and the company before me, mind you, this is a small angel group. Like collectively, they invest like $100,000 max, maybe 200. And this guy before me is pitching a fusion energy project. I'm like, dog, you're trying to raise 200 grand. Like you need to raise 200 million. What are you doing here? So it sounded good. It sounded convincing.
We've only been working on it since the 50s, right, in a laboratory. So,
but I mean, look, technology builds upon decades and decades
Right.
of understanding. I mean, that's why there's some pretty cool things in hydrogen right now, because we've been working on
True.
hydrogen for the
This
last
is
40
true.
or 50 years. So, look, I think I'm not an expert in nuclear energy, but I do think that we will figure out fusion. I think that, I don't know if that's in 10 years, 20 years, or 100 years. I do think at some point we figure it out. And think about the implications and second order effects of having unlimited energy solves a lot of problems. But to your point, it's like, people think it's all secretive and that you can get killed, because what happens when you completely negate renewables and oil and gas? I mean, you could have collapse of society theoretically, right? So I don't know. I watched this documentary a while back with this guy that's pretty convincing on, we're talking about aliens. And
Let's go right into it.
That's a pivot.
I mean, that's right next to
Hey,
it.
Julie, can you rewind the tape?
Fusion
I don't
to
remember us
aliens.
talking about aliens, but go ahead. Go ahead.
We all know they're real.
We were
Listen to
talking
this.
about
This
aliens.
documentary
Sure.
was from 2018, and I watched this at the beginning of COVID. And this guy's talking about a couple different things. He's talking about aliens, and he starts talking about how the government's going to start rolling out all these false flags on alien sightings. Guess what? Right after I watched this is when the Pentagon and everyone starts rolling out footage
The
of
special commission. and
of
everything,
aliens. I
yeah.
was like, holy shit, this guy is right.
Wait till Elon releases the Area 51 files.
Yes.
It's gonna just be crazy.
One tweet at a time. But this guy was talking about how that we've already discovered technology for infinite energy, and if you believe in aliens, which I do, I think that it's mathematical impossibility that, or probability that you don't have aliens. I mean, they've discovered some energy source where they can travel all around the universe, right? So you got to think that somewhere in the timeline of human civilization that we figure out unlimited energy. Is it fusion? I don't know.
So my take on this is you have a Republican House that has a big budget cutting, what they feel is mandate. And this is a struggling government lab that needs to make an announcement to justify their funding. So
I did hear that on
yeah,
Twitter.
and
I've
so,
heard that on Twitter.
Yeah, that to me seems, because I think devil's in the details. Mark and I were talking about this morning. You can probably talk more about it, but saying it was a net energy gain was kind of a stretch of manipulating data, I think. That being said, I will say at the end of the day, if we're going to solve all these issues, we need more shots on goal. So as big a libertarian as I am, if the government's going to spend the money, at least throw it in a lab and let scientists geek out. With
I probably lean towards thinking that that's the correct theory. I mean, that's how science has always been. I mean, you look at go back to Galileo. He discovers a constellation. Galileo's poor, didn't have any money. Goes to a king, says, "Hey," convinces this king that this constellation, the stars were put in by gods, and that named it after him. And then the king puts him on payroll and starts funding them, right? And so, I mean, science has been like this for a long time, where you manipulate things to get government funding. And so, I mean, I could see that being plausible.
I think any of these really hard tech science deals, contrary to what I believed when I went in 2010, starting investing in the space, those that actually rely on government funding tend to go further, because you need capital that's non-dilutive. And when I think of the three fusion companies that I was the most impressed with, there's one in the UK, there's one at MIT, there's one out of Silicon Valley. They're all leaning on laboratories and research and universities to get further, because there are some serious hard science issues that have not been necessarily figured out. And some of it is engineering, but I think some of it is still scientific.
I mean, the front end is generational, right? That's what they talked about this particular moment with the ignition that was achieved for the first time with the lasers. But you think about where this all started right after the Manhattan Project, essentially in World War II.
Yeah.
It's got to have some staying power, because those those scientific breakthroughs, just that it's a little bit different than writing new code.
Yeah, no,
Right.
100%.
Speaking of Val Kilmer, like he was in The Saint, but what was the great movie that was a
Real
playoff?
Genius.
Real Genius.
One of
See,
the
we're talking laser
It's Val
beams.
Kilmer
It's
Day.
Val Kilmer. Maybe Val Kilmer is the epicenter of fusion. I know he can't speak
Maybe
anymore.
that's why I can't talk.
They
got to him.
got see,
got to
we
him.
just cracked.
dude.
something
Just
here.
like what happened with Fink. What happened with Larry Fink on the last BDE show?
Derp's
Yeah.
my friend.
So if you tuned in last week, we talked
This is
about
huge.
we talked about Larry Fink and BlackRock's role in part in driving the energy transition narrative and divestment out of oil and gas. 3 days after BDE started getting some pressure from one of BlackRock's LPs for Larry Fink's resignation. I don't think that that's coincidence. Like we just talked about BlackRock. I mean, just randomly on the show, and then 3 days later, they're pushing for.
I know the
resignation.
producer has given us some numbers where, I mean, the distribution on the show is crazy post. I mean, it's a long tail,
It's like-
but it clearly works its way through the halls of power.
So this reminds me of a little joke. There's this elephant, and the elephant steps on something, gets a thorn in its foot, is in such pain, can't do anything. A mouse comes along and says, "You want me to help you?" Pulls out the thorn, and the elephant is like, "Oh my gosh, that's so great! Can I do anything for you? Let me do a favor for you." And the mouse goes, "Yeah, I'd like to make love to you." And the elephant's like, "Okay." Yeah, the elephant's, hold on, stick with me. The elephant's like, "Okay." So the mouse climbs up on the back of the elephant, starts going to town. A coconut
Wait, what was the
falls,
noise?
A coconut falls out of the tree, hits the elephant on the head, and the elephant goes, "Ouch!" And the mouse says, "Yeah, take it all, bitch." I don't mean to burst your bubble, but I'm not sure BlackRock called for BlackRock fire against anything to do with.
Remember when the show used to
BDE?
have integrity and respect?
Integrity.
I think there should be respect.
Someone just tuned into our live stream of BDE to hear Chuck talking about a mouse and an elephant.
I thought it was a rather self-deprecating, appropriate analogy.
I thought it was funny.
Can you prove Larry Fink has not gotten pressure by shareholders because of our show? Can you prove it?
That's fair enough.
This is like the JF.
No, I want it to be true.
I saw your JFK podcast. I mean,
That's
this is
true.
another one of those.
That's
We
true.
you need to investigate this.
That is
Chuck-
that is-
Chuck Yates needs a job. This is a perfect category.
All right, Chuck,
All
what do we
right,
got
let's
next
do
on
thi-
the
let's
list?
let's do this. Let's go to the oil markets. Let's start
Mm.
talking demand. We got two big things going on that I'll throw out. One, it appears after the revolution in China, maybe the people of China heard us talking about it on BDE and they revolted and all, but you do seem to have COVID easing. The Chinese government's come out and said they're going to stop tracking certain movements. They're easing quarantine. Interestingly enough, they are leaving the pandemic app in place on everybody's phone. So you've got China COVID easing. And then the other thing that's interesting is United Airlines ordered 100 of the 787s, the Dreamliners,
Yeah.
largest airplane order in history. Two demand things. What do we think?
How many did they order?
100
100.
with an option to buy another 100.
Where's the cash coming from to do that?
Stock was down 1%
Exactly.
from United. Boeing was up.
I mean,
Some of it's to replace a pretty old wide body fleet with
Right.
new tech, but I don't know how much of that is kind of incremental capacity additions to longer haul routes.
Look, I mean, I've been tracking China since the 90s. A lot of the information that comes out of China, we just don't know what's true and what's not true. So if that's the PR that they're releasing, I mean, I still am questioning, is it real or is it Memorex? Don't know. No one understands that was anyone born after 2000 doesn't know what Memorex is, but China
know
to
what
me is a
Memorex
question
is.
mark. I don't believe it for a minute. I think they're great at trying to manage a narrative. So we'll see.
I'll still say this about China. They're a horrific authoritarian government. I mean, I don't want to say anything, but
But there is a
do-
but.
They do feel like they have been more responsive to the population since Tiananmen Square, kind of in my lifetime than before. And you got really close a couple of weeks ago to the guy with the gun sitting there, not shooting the population. And that's when a dictatorship fails, is when the soldier on the ground will not pull the trigger. And so, is this backing off driven by the populace? There's only so much they can take. I think kind of so.
The one great thing about authoritarianism is that there is a vanguard of the proletariat. There is a ruling class. And in today's age with social media, if you're the ruling class and you want to stay in power and continue to be rich and do whatever you want, you have to make some concessions, of course. I mean, so I'm like, is this great? No, I mean, it's sort of hey, it's great to be the vanguard, and the vanguard has to do what they think to remain in power.
Yeah,
that's just
there.
the way it's always
I
is.
just don't understand the incentive. What would be the incentive of zero COVID and keeping people locked down? I know it's easy to say, oh, they want to control people, but like, why? Like, what's the incentive to do that? Has anyone thought about that?
So this was interesting. So when I had Jeremy Arndt and Ryan Gurney from Montrose Lane on the podcast, when we were doing our mic checks, we were talking about that exact thing. So there's kind of 3 minutes of us talking China at the start of that podcast, just because I kind of found it interesting. Jeremy it's just about control. So that's why we're going to have it.
I just think that's too generic.
Well, hang on one second, because Sarah, my 17-year-old daughter, her take is China did COVID probably accidentally, but they let it slip out of a lab, whether they created it or not, who knows. And the defense is, see how serious we're taking. We didn't actually do this. If they're blowing it off, maybe there's more criticism of them and all that. But Mark has the best theory on it.
The dictator's paranoia of anything that could take them down. And so all these restrictions on mobility, and it reduces my supreme being's risk of getting COVID. I heard that some time ago, and I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. And we were surmising what it would be if you got an audience with Putin. What would you see trying to get to him, or in your process of getting to Putin? So there's all these things that are surrounding all of these dictators in these authoritarian regimes with multiple layers of production. You just don't know how far the paranoia can go in terms of protecting their own personal safety and well-being.
Because how old is she? I mean, he's
none of those guys are young,
right? I mean, he's in the elder age of, he gets it, he might die.
I think Russia's economy is the size of Oklahoma, so I don't give them a lot of credibility. But even though they're dangerous, let's go to China. It's something my wife taught me. I think China is playing hard to get. And for those of us guys, speaking of the elephant and the mouse and the coconut, when a girl plays hard to get at a bar, what do all the guys want to do? It drives them crazy. Yeah. I think China is going back to America, primarily its biggest customers, the Apples of the world, saying, hey, you need me. And if we're locked down, you're going to suffer too. And what did China, we're seeing this play out. What did Apple do? They've flown over there and said, what can we do to make this better? So while Apple's trying to find other resources of manufacturing, I think in some ways China is saying, okay,
you need us.
The world needs us. We're showing you that. And that's my belief. I think it's very clear in my mind, but let's debate that. And I think there's some good theories.
Speaking of that, did you see that Apple's opening up I don't know if they're opening up or partnering up with a new chip manufacturing plant in Phoenix? And so you're starting to see onshoring, trying to mitigate some of that risk. And I'm looking here. I don't know if y'all know any numbers off the top of your head. And Mark, maybe you do. I'm trying to look for what oil demand is in China and just what the trend is. I'm getting a bunch of articles from Bloomberg.
So I've read Josh Young's been tweeting out a lot of this stuff. So I may have this wrong, and Josh can pipe up if I do. But I want to say that oil demand over the last 3 months, China's down 30-ish%, 40-ish%. So that's translating into what, like 1.5 million barrels a day? Is that about right? something like that. So
Yeah, I literally have no numbers. So I
Harsh
don't-
nodding. Sounds right.
harsh nodding or Mark's nodding.
When in doubt, make it up, right?
Yeah. So
Well, I think to the larger point, there's another element of this. I don't know if you want to talk about your take on Xi and Xi's meeting with the Saudis and how this all intersects all of this.
let's talk about it. What happened? What
Well,
was the meeting?
The visit to the kingdom, right? And so on the heels of Biden and his meeting, what what's the end game here diplomatically or politically with, are they signaling something that, they're concerned about reopening and security of supply, which I think is incredibly bullish. I don't know.
All I know is that this has to be like one of the oddest times for oil prices, in my opinion, because we're at $75 oil, which, you adjust it for inflation. That's like $50 oil a couple of years ago.
Right.
So, I mean, it's a pretty low price environment, but you look at everything, if Chinese oil demand is down 30% and it looks like they may be opening up and demand's going up. And, I've seen multiple tweets this week from American producers saying that they're taking new drills off of their schedule because cost of supplies is just going through the roof. People were drilling wells for $6 million last year, same exact wells going into 2023. The AFEs are $7 million plus. So it's easy to see the writing on the wall that production from United States is dropping off. United States isn't going to come save the day. So how's oil prices just staying at
And OPEC's continuing
75.
to produce, right? I mean, so we see supply that's pretty consistent or constant.
Yeah.
And I do think while people are saying there's this massive recession, which I do believe is happening, it's my belief, but I think you see, like China, for example, once they start opening up, it's going to almost combat that in some ways.
That's what I'm very curious if oil rips in 2023, and it's just hard to imagine it staying under
It's
$100
just
but
fundamentally hard to imagine that there's anything but a physically tight structural market, just given the magnitude of underinvestment.
Absolutely.
Most of the world's production base, including the Saudis, is multiple decades old, and so there's been there's been underinvestment over a protracted period to the tune of several $100 billion a year, depending on what baseline you look at. So it doesn't replace itself. And I don't think we're at any point globally where outside of a recession, and these events seem long and protracted when you're in the middle of them, but when you go back and look at a long dated history of oil demand over the last 30 to 50 years, those are blips. So, the absolute challenge of supplying over 100 million barrels a day structurally is growing with, the longer we, don't add to the actual growth and maintenance capital from this reduced level. And some of the anecdotes that you're hearing, and I'm picking up a few as well, is it seems as tight in the supply chain as it's ever been.
My anecdotes is that renewables replace oil. What happened to that?
This was wild. I think it was last Thursday. Because I was on my deathbed Friday, coughing.
Welcome
fever.
back.
Yeah, thank you. The jury was out there for a while on
Was
Friday.
it COVID or the flu?
I don't know. I didn't get
Wait,
tested.
when's the
either
party?
way.
That's all I care about.
December 23rd.
All right.
Christmas Eve.
I'm gonna
But
daughter's
I had
birthday.
I had lunch with oilfield guy, and we were talking about it. Things he used to pay $200 for, he's paying $7,000 for. And he was talking about a well that cost $3 million, now costing $6 million. But an even bigger problem that I didn't appreciate is, out in the oil field, if somebody didn't show up on time, everything grinds to a halt, and you're paying day rates on everything, right?
Yeah.
He says that's happening more and more. And you used to be able to replace
Why aren't people
and
showing up? That's a good question. I'd like to know more about that.
Probably
supply supply chain
just stacked up
constraints.
with jobs. They're so busy that they can't service all the
just
jobs. So
too much demand.
Yeah.
Budget announcements, which are ironically made deep into February into March for the coming year. So you're 2/3 of the way through the first quarter, I think, are going to be, telling of the, what's the direction. Most of the spending capital spending increase pressure based on what we've just been talking about appears to be motivated by inflation. How much are you going to tolerate? You just mentioned they're taking new drills off the schedule, so it'll be really interesting to watch to see how much of that, with crude's correction here going into budget setting, what's the signal to the investment community in terms of how aggressively we want to spend. Some of it we just can't mount a higher level of activity.
And who was it? Was it Conoco that came out with the press release? They're increasing spending and Mr. President to support it all. And some snarky people on Twitter were like, "Hey, that's just flat out inflation.
Right.
Doesn't mean you're drilling anymore."
I'm going to bring up this chart real quick on the screen. Y'all can't see it, but this was a chart of break-even analysis by basin in the United States, which shows the DJ Basin being the cheapest basin to operate in.
Well, you know why that is, Collin, don't you?
What's
The
that?
DJ doesn't have to hire a band.
Ta-da-ta.
Thank you. Sorry, I love that
This
joke.
chart kind of bugs me a little bit because it's actually backwards.
Kinda like it.
The first bar is December 22, and then it works backwards to 21. So you can see from 2021 break-even cost has just gone up by basin. And so that's probably not even true break-even cost analysis. I've heard pretty much the last 4 years.
No one's drilling 10% theoretical break even at the well level.
Yeah. So
I mean, you
If
can't.
if they are, they didn't get the memo.
Well, yeah, I know. And at the end of the day, it's if you're trading at 3 times EBITDA, you got to at least be drilling at 35.
That's the other thing. I mean,
40%
who- yeah,
rate of
who-
return well.
Who wants to grow into that type of compressed valuation? Do you want to sell more cash flow at 3 times?
Yeah. Incentive's not there.
Yeah, there's an interesting and ongoing political overlay, but this is fundamentally about what the response is to investors in the sector and what they want. I'm seeing more of a shift now. Let's shift from dividend increases to buybacks.
yeah.
I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about that, but remember not too long ago there were several fairly poorly timed buybacks right before the COVID collapse, about a year before that. So
Yeah. What kind of multiples did you see on EMPs, like peak shell? I mean, were these trading at 5x?
it depends on where you are, and you saw a pretty quick normalization or recalibration when the Permian started showing a little bit of wear and tear, and you had things like, not picking on Concho, the Dominator pad, and so there was a real I think the highest I saw was kind of mid-teens EBITDA multiples.
Damn, that's crazy.
And then the multi, the gassier and the basin diversified, we're trading in the mid to upper mid single digits. So there was a big spread between Permian pure play at that time, and this was back in. That all started to come back in mid to late 2019.
Yeah, as I say,
I mean, the way to almost think about it during the shale revolution is it wasn't really even EBITDA multiples; it was dollar per acre,
Right.
And in effect, one well de-risking acreage mean you no longer trade at $20,000 per acre; you trade at $30,000 per acre.
yeah,
I mean, it got that level of kind of internet frenzy bubble like
yeah.
back in the day.
I mean, that's tech like multiples getting that, but back then I was in the oil field, so I wasn't really paying attention to the stocks themselves. Like
We looked at that pretty closely, and having spent more time around non-pure plays, it was pretty interesting in terms of how, thinking back, before there was such a thing as a Permian pure play, there were companies in the sector that were diversifying into or vertically integrating into things like drilling and completion,
yeah,
which always typically resulted in a discount to a kind of a pure E&P multiple, right?
yeah,
So
yeah. So until the market really decides that they want to own these stocks, I mean, there's just no incentive to spend a ton of money
we're
chewing
kind
through
of,
your acreage.
kind of back sub 5%. I think 4.6% weighting is what I saw. A lot of enthusiasm for getting back to the heyday multiples, but I think we've got a lot of complex headwinds to deal with at the
I
moment.
mean, so Brad Olson said this, and Brad, I hope I'm right about this. If not, I will correct it next week on BDE or something. But I want to say Brad said that night we did the podcast at Fuse that despite energy being the top performing asset category this year, there were still net outflows of capital into the space, despite being the best performer.
Yeah.
So, which is just crazy.
That is pretty
maybe to shore up drawdowns elsewhere.
Yeah,
Right.
maybe so.
Yeah. So that'll it's funny how you look, like a lot of these things are investor led, right? And where capital's flowing to. And I just can't imagine if I'm sitting in an E&P seat, I can't imagine, hey, I'm going to drill more wells and grow production, chew through my good rock for $75 oil when costs are skyrocketing. Like, why would I do that? And if I can just produce my just kind of blow down my PDP, and then when commodity prices come up.
Well, I was talking to this was about 6 months ago. I was talking to a CFO of one of the big boys, and we were just shooting the bull, and I'm like, how's it going? And he goes, great. I send out a dividend and nobody bitches at me. He said that's a lot easier than run those freaking rigs. So I was like,
one other marker I think to look for, it was out a couple of weeks ago in a news story. I forget if it was Reuters. There was a story that NCAP is contemplating its first new oil and gas fund in 5 years. That would make it Fund 12. No speculation as to size, but that certainly plays in the universe of big endowment and institutional LP world, where what we've been talking about is the reluctance or the reticence to invest in traditional energy was driven by things outside of the pure economic motivation for owning the sector. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out if it does come to market, and how many more.
So important thing to say here. We have all talked for years about peak shale being the YDC roast of Chuck Yates when I got the tattoo on my butt. I'm going to say to my dear friends at NCAP, and I actually like those guys a whole lot, their Fund 11 was peak shale. I mean, it was $7 billion. I mean, that was a massive. But, to your point, Mark, what we've seen this year is Carnelian went out to raise Fund 3, and they've crushed it. I mean, I think if you look at their IRRs returns, they're number one out there, and I think they're like number one by a good amount. They went out to raise the fund, and Putin invaded Ukraine. So they hit their hard cap kind of right off the bat. Pearl's out there. Billy Quinn will get his fundraise, hit a hard cap. Don't know that, but he'll get a fundraise. Quantum, I don't know exactly where they are. They kind of started and stopped, but I think they're out fundraising. So, with Carnelian and Pearl, you were able to talk the small, niche-y, boutique type funds raising, and we've always kind of said there will be a spot for that. NCAP, I think, and Quantum are really your test of just the big beta theory. Do we want energy or not?
And I think with the there's been an increasing volume of commentary on just degradation in the quality of the Permian in particular. Things are maturing. You've got less core in tier one, and that's just part of the natural cycle. And so I don't think anybody that I've talked to disagrees that we don't need another pretty significant round of consolidation, which would include, replenishing inventory through good, partially developed private assets. So, playing at least one more round of the acquire, scope out, develop, and flip game.
Yeah.
I think it's going to take a longer horizon attitude. I just think it's going to be interesting to see, the LPs that do sign up for that. Because we're making a multi-year bet here in the face of things that have been causing some reticence to invest in traditional oil and gas among many others like ESG, et cetera.
Yeah.
I'd actually love to see what the thesis is for in-caps raised, quantums raised, because they're the bigger beta type firms. Because if I'm sitting there and you made me go raise a fund today, my pitch would be everything's trading at 3 times EBITDA. There's no incentive to drill. That means one of two things. Either multiples have to double over the next 3 years to excite users to drill more, or we're hosed, or oil goes to 250. I don't think you can have both of them.
No.
You know, there's a tension there. And I think the only thing that really takes that off the table is massive recession. And, you know, what can you say? If massive recession hits, massive recession hits.
Yeah. So ending out the show, Chuck, who do we have for finger of the week?
Let's do it. All right. Finger of the week goes to heart disease because it took another of my heroes, Mike Leach, the Pirate, Texas Tech, former Texas Tech coach, has passed away this morning from a massive heart attack that he suffered a few days ago.
Yeah, really sad. Mike Leach was, he's a fan favorite, whether it's at Texas Tech or any other school that he coached at. We were talking about him this morning and like all of his antics and
Interests.
Yeah. You go on Twitter and search Mike Leach, and there's like all these.
Well, he never played college football.
Rugby.
What?
Rugby at BYU.
Played rugby at BYU. Yep. Fascinated by 18th century pirates. So always talking about Blackbeard and Calico Jack. It kind of really came to light. People at Texas Tech knew all about the pirate and stuff, but remember Friday Night Lights?
Yeah.
He was in, I think it was season 4, where the coach was walking by and he was just some random guy in the parking lot's like, swing your sword.
They got a cameo on there.
And all that. But, he's kind of who I'd like to be. One, he never hesitated speaking his mind.
Yeah.
2, he was just intellectually curious. I mean, he was a world-renowned expert in Native America, grizzly bears, Daniel Boone, chimpanzees, whales, and Jason Pollock art. I mean,
it's a lot of random stuff.
He taught, when he was at Washington State, he taught a seminar called Insurgent Warfare and Football Strategies.
Amazing.
And the last thing I'll say, and I could talk Mike Leach all day because I was a big fan, but don't underappreciate the coaching tree. All of these guys were players or assistants for Mike Leach. Art Briles, Sonny Dykes, who with TCU is playing in the Dana Holgerson, the U of H coach, Lincoln Riley, Cliff Kingsbury, Josh Huppel. I mean, dude's generated a lot of really good head coaches.
And I read in one announcement this morning that his last ultimate act was that he was an organ donor as well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Just consistent with who he was.
Yeah.
So everybody cut back on fat, walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My favorite Mike Leach story, growing up I was born in Lubbock, so I was always a Texas Tech fan as a kid growing up, unfortunately. And anyways, when that one student, he got locked in the closet for a concussion, and I was just like, that was just like some rich kid is like, my dad will sue you. And like Mike Leach, like it didn't even seem like Mike Leach was who he was, and like
you know who that was.
Yeah, you know who that was, right?
No, I don't know who it was.
I think the Pony Express at SMU predates you.
Yeah,
Eric Dickerson and Craig James. That was Craig James's son.
Oh, really?
and Craig James at that point might have been the number one college analyst out there, right? I mean, him and
I think he was on CBS at that time, yeah.
But no. So anyway, it was very prominent person's son. You're right. And it's like, you're going to talk back to me? Go get in the closet.
Yeah, go get in the closet. So, yeah.
Rest in peace, Mike
definitely
Leach.
be missed. Everyone, appreciate y'all tuning in for today's show. We'll be back next week, as always, 10:30 a.m. Central Time on Tuesday. Appreciate y'all hanging out with us. Share the episode with a friend if you don't mind.